Next, I'm going to go to Spencer Cash. Spencer is the president of Magnolia Defenders at the University of Mississippi. Spencer, you're recognized.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Chairman. As he said, I'm Spencer Cash. I'm a third-year law student at the University of Mississippi. I'm glad to be here. I'm originally from Hickory, Mississippi. I think Representative is familiar with that as well. Representative Hurst, excuse me. So thank you so much for the invite. I'm here to provide a student perspective. As he said, I'm part of the Magnolia Defenders, which is a student group that is interested in public defending in the state of Mississippi and outward. But I want to start off with a quote from a Kentucky public defender who's a 2021 grad, who said, "I was persistently disappointed in the lack of public defender jobs throughout the state." She's from South Mississippi, and she's currently recruiting students from the university to go work in Kentucky. In fact, 2 have taken her up on that job. Now they've taken offers, and there are other third-year students who have been offered to work in Kentucky. But Kentucky's not the only state that's taking Mississippi students away to do public defense work. We're losing students to Memphis, and throughout Tennessee, all throughout Georgia, Florida, New York, Alabama, California, you name it. I mean, Mississippi students have gone to do public defending elsewhere. And there are several students currently, like the Kentucky public defender, that are persistently disappointed in the options present in the state. You know, the reality is when we graduate, we likely won't have a full-time public defender job in the state of Mississippi. There could be a lot of reasons for that. I mean, some of it could be the hiring cycle. You know, we take the bar in July. We won't know until October, and so there's like a really small gap of time. And a lot of time those full-time public defenders don't leave their jobs, which continuity is a good thing. But for us looking, you know, that is a barrier to us. And, you know, there also, you know, there have been openings in Jackson, and for me specifically, that's a little more complicated for me. I've got a wife and a 4-year-old, and if I were to pursue what I really want to do is full-time public defense, I'm going to have to uproot my child, and my wife too, from really the only community that she's known, from her friends, from her school. So I'm almost have to choose between this professional feeling that I have and this personal life thing too. I shouldn't have to sacrifice that. But Magnolia Defenders was formed a couple of years ago to kind of address this type of frustration, this disappointment. And in fact, the 2 founders of Magnolia Defenders are both full-time public defenders outside of Mississippi now. But you know, we want to do this. You know, it is an ideal that a lot of us share, but it's also a fundamental right, as has been, you know, discussed already. And you know, as much of a right as is to bear arms, you know, be, you know, free from illegal searches and seizures. And so we have a lot of students that are interested in this. We run about 25 to 30 members, and there are other students that are outside the organization that are interested. So on a micro level, there are students in the Magnolia Defenders who are disappointed, but hopeful, because I'm here today, and I think that's a really, really nice thing. But what Magnolia Defenders has essentially turned into is it's turned into a place for us to commiserate, for one thing, but also it's turned into us being able to network with out-of-state public defense services. So we have really close connections to the Memphis office, Birmingham, Atlanta, and elsewhere, and we're able to get our students jobs as public defenders elsewhere, and that's kind of what Magnolia Defenders has turned into. But that's just really on a micro level, but it's kind of representative of a macro level issue that got us here. I did some other things before law school. I was a 7th grade English teacher in Newton, Mississippi for a little bit, and it was part of what then was known as the Critical Needs Scholarship. It's essentially Teach for America. Mississippi had a scholarship available, and I took them up on that. It was a loan forgiveness program. And one of the things that we had to teach our students was, you know, author's purpose, author's theme, you know, and how do you figure that out? and it's not always obvious what the author's trying to tell you. And so, of course, it was frustrating for them. It was frustrating for me sometimes too to figure out, how do I teach them this concept? And so what we had to do is we had to teach them that there are ways that you can look and figure out what the author's trying to say. Like maybe they used a picture. Why did they italicize this word? What type of adjectives are they using to kind of get their point across? And eventually they were able to figure out what the author's purpose was. And so if you take that framework and you move it to the Mississippi system as it stands now, Mississippi hasn't just flat out said we don't want a full-time system. They haven't said that. But if we look outside and we look to the context clues, there's no state oversight commission. There's no statewide system. There's a multi-million-dollar discrepancy in what the district attorney's office is paid versus what a public defender's office is paid. And then just on a micro level, how much difference there is in a public defender and an ADA being paid. So those four things together, if you look, it's logical to assume that public defense is just less valuable in the state's eyes. We don't believe that it's a less valuable thing. We think it's a very important work. But it's literally less valuable because of the amount of funding that the state has been able to put in it. And it's also less valuable because there hasn't been time and effort from the state level to be able to say, like, hey, look, this is important to us. And there have been movements. But both on a macro level and a micro level, this is kind of where we are. But I love Mississippi. I'm from here. I plan on being here. I'm not going anywhere. In fact, I'm working for an attorney now in Oxford as part of the CJA panel. I'm doing some federal defender work with him. And so Magnolia Defenders is grateful and thankful to be seen and heard. And there's been some question about, like, what do we do? What about the private attorneys and things? Like, we're here. Like, we want to do it, and we're leaving. And there's students here now that could alleviate some of that pressure. So if you build it, we will come. We're here, and people will come, because right now we're leaving. Thank you, Chairman. I can take any questions.
Spencer, you heard, there's been quite a bit of testimony about this disparity between ADA or DAs and public defenders. We're aware of that. You heard, I think, with David Carroll talking about some public defenders are elected in different states. And one of them, I think he gave the example, ran on a tough on crime platform. My experience is, how do you change, based on what you've learned and your experience, how do you change? Because that's the policy. Everybody you're looking at around this table are policy makers. And that tough on crime mindset is often what we have to run on. So how do you change that messaging that the public defender and the need for the protection of the Sixth Amendment is just as important as the protection of the Second Amendment?
Yeah, I think one thing that gets lost sometimes is accountability. Public defenders aren't saying these people shouldn't be held accountable. So there is still this sense of accountability that public defenders are there to help make sure happens. So I think having a conversation around that, I think, is important. Crime is not something that we're okay with, I guess, is essentially what I'm getting at. How to change the messaging. I mean, I think that Justice Kitchens alluded to this a little bit. It took a lot of time to change the messaging from the district attorneys growing into what they are, and I think it's just going to take some time to do the same. And I was unfamiliar with that history until he spoke, but I think it's going to be something similar to that.
All right. Any other questions for Spencer? Anybody? The gentleman from DeSoto.
Spencer, thanks for being here. One question that I have for you, specifically when you talk about graduates, 3Ls, potential graduates going into the legal field. I chose to be a prosecutor because there was no private counterpart to it, right? You can only be a prosecutor and work for the state. But when you look at PD work, it's akin to criminal defense. What do you see as the big discernment between a graduate looking to be specifically a public defender as opposed to just joining the criminal defense bar?
Well, I think there is some overlap between some of the public defenders and criminal defense work. I know one of my professors now just sent the hall is both a public defender and a full-time criminal defense attorney, and she's in DeSoto County. So I think maybe it comes down to money. I mean, I'm sure that there's just some truth in that. There's more money to be made there, but we're not all bleeding hearts, I guess, is another thing too. I mean, I think it's just a fundamental right. I mean, we do believe in it, but it is the right thing to do. But I think money might have something to do with it.
All right. Any further questions for Mr. Cash? Lady from Madison, you've been awful quiet. Are you sick? Spencer, thank you. Keep up the good work. We appreciate you coming.
Yeah, thank you.